My name's Michael Bowman. I think I know most everybody here, but just in case, I'm a director of engineering over at Mile 2. We're about a block that way. And also adjunct at Sinclair. I teach in the evenings, computer science courses. And I was running the Dayton Data Visualization meetup, so there's a question mark there. We've kind of went on hiatus for a while. We're thinking about starting some stuff up. We got some ideas, but if you're interested, definitely go ahead and join that meetup, and that'll get you on the mailing list, and you'll hear all about upcoming events and whatever it is we decide to do with that group. You'll be the first to know. Mile 2, we're hiring, so if you like doing this stuff, if this sounds like fun, if you're interested in this stuff, please come talk to me. We've got some Mile 2 folks here, if they could raise their hands. Go talk to one of these guys. They would love to tell you all about Mile 2 and all the fun we have over there. We always need software developers. So with that, data visualization workflows. It takes a lot of different tools to do a data visualization, right? So I'm sure if you've ever tried, right, you've got to spend a lot of time scrubbing data and getting the data into a usable format. But even after that, right, there's a lot of prototyping and figuring out and exploration that happens before you get to a workable visualization. A lot of the examples online are either trivial or standalone. So we'll talk about this a lot today. Like if you go to blocks.org for D3 and check out a lot of their examples, they're all written in D3, which makes it hard if you're trying to integrate it into an Angular app or a React app. And also, because I could hear in my head some of the questions I was going to get while I was doing this talk, like there's no right way to do this. This is just 4 ways that I've done it at least once, right? And even myself, I always do it differently depending on what I'm doing. I'm always integrating in new tools, trying out new things. So this is just take it for what it's worth. You can do it however you want. If you get from numbers to some blinky lights on your screen, congratulations, you've made a data visualization. All right, so our first one, these guys. The data set we're going to be using is song links from the Ramones' first album. Any Ramones fans? Guys like this? So this is an older album, right? 1976 it came out. It actually tanked really hard. It only sold 6,000 copies the first year. But despite that, it's probably one of the most influential albums ever made. Every band you hear now has been influenced by the Ramones in some way. So, and the bar chart we're going to be making is there on the right. All right. So the workflow for this one, I started off with the data set, sort of poking around with it in Tableau, figuring out the best way to present this data. And then I did a quick prototype with CodePen and D3 because that was super easy to just get something going and try things out. And then I made a React application, a component that I could reuse in any React app with it. So here's our data set. I've displayed it here in a table, but it's a CSV file. We've got the track number, the song name, the length in seconds, and then I have a human readable length there too in the minutes and seconds. So that's what we're playing with. And so the first thing I wanted to talk about is Tableau. So this is a awesome, it's a free tool out there on the internet. They have paid versions if you get way into it and you want to poke around. But the free version's what I use, and it's good for everything I've ever wanted to do with it. Though admittedly, I don't use it for much, right? For me, it's more of a data exploration tool. So with this data set, what I wanted to use was, I just wanted to see like how did the data look when it's on the screen, right? Because sometimes you'll get a data set, and in this case, maybe we had a song that was super long, or maybe we had a song that was super short, and a bar chart might not have looked the best way to present it, maybe a line chart or something else. But Tableau is an awesome tool that you can use to just sort of flip through different visualizations and figure out which one best fits your data and how you want to do it. So it's super complex. You can join data. You can do a ton of stuff. And a lot of people, this is their only tool, right? You can export out SVG files from Tableau and have a print-ready visualization in no time. So for me, though, looking at it, there were some problems that, I figured out the bar chart was how I wanted to go. But the problem was it was too wide for mobile, right? It would look terrible on a mobile device, right? Especially when the text for the track titles shrinks down. Also, we have the axis for the number of seconds going up, but that's not really how humans think. I would much rather print out that human readable, minutes, seconds data set there for the users. And then just storytelling, right? This is just this is like looking at a CSV file, maybe one step above it, right? So now I can see it visually, but it's not telling me anything about the data. So I can't highlight like the shortest song and the longest song or do any sort of prompting to my users. It's just sort of vomited the data out there for everybody to see, right? So first, I want to show the D3 solution. So that's what was going through my head when I started on this. So here's my prototype I made in CodePen using D3. So I've, and you can see some problems with it right off the bat, right? So this is pretty much, I took the bar chart tutorial from D3 and put my data in it and changed some styles, right? I'm going to use D3 CSV file as the first call. Let me make that a little bit bigger for you all. I call a URL, and then I get back a data object from this D3 CSV function call. Then I'm doing a bunch of manual DOM manipulation here, right? So I select out my DOM element by ID and append an SVG tag. So that's what this is all doing. I have a linear scale here. So what that does is tell me how long the bar chart should be for my data. Just some garbage here, right? Extents, right? That will take your data and give you the min and max, which you would need if you're going to do a scaling function, right? You need to know the lowest number and the highest number. And then I just loop through the tracks and append a group tag to the SVG element and calculate out the song, right? And so now I can do highlighting. So I have track number 3 and track number 7 as the shortest and longest songs. And now I've got the human readable format tagged to the end of the bar chart there where it's a little easier to read. All right. So any questions about that? So the thing we should take away from this, right, is that this is how a D3 tutorial would show you to do it, but it's definitely not. We've come a long way in software development since then, right? We have tools like React and Angular, and a huge point or a huge benefit of using these tools is that you're not going in and managing DOM elements yourself. You're letting the framework take care of that for you, all right? So we can do that. All right, so what about React? This is what we just talked about, right? And what we want to do is pull out the visualization parts and the jQuery parts, right? The fetching the data, the setting attributes, creating DOM elements, all the jQuery stuff we want to throw away and use React for that. So this is a chart made by Elijah Meeks. He went through the D3 library and cataloged all the functions. So he made a visualization of the visualization library, right? And you can see a lot of it, the DOM utilities, the Lodash parts, like all of this stuff is sort of built in to JavaScript or React now. We don't worry about that stuff so much. What we want to focus on in our applications is the data viz part, right? So doing the scales, doing the geospatial stuff, that's all the useful stuff that we want to focus on when we're building our apps. All right. So modular D3, so as, a few years ago, starting with version 4, they broke up D3 now, so you can import just the parts you need. So that part where I was taking the CSV file and reading the CSV file in and creating an array of objects, that's all handled now by this D3 DSV package, which stands for delimited separated values, because you can have other things other than commas in there, tabs or pipes or whatever. The scale, right, that is, oops. The scale, that's the one bit we need to keep, right, for how long to make the bar charts. And then the extent for getting the min and the max of the song length. So if we could just pull out those parts, we'd be good. So I'm going to show you now a solution here with React, and hopefully show you how, you know, the code changes, right? So now instead of having all that just crammed into one file and 100 lines of crazy stuff, now we can start to split things apart and build up components that have just a single responsibility instead of them being responsible for everything. So who uses React here? React developers? A lot? Okay, good. So here's how you would do a data visualization in React now. Here's my app, so this is the main entry point. After the component mounts, I'm using the new browser API, Fetch API, to get the data, which isn't that interesting, right? That's how you just do things now. But then I have the CSV parse function here. So I've imported D3 DSV, so you get that installed with just npm install save D3-DSV, and then it's a named function that I imported out of that package. And I'm going to use here to take my data string, so that whole file contents as a string, separate out the CSV values, and what that gives me is an array of objects that are named the same thing as my columns, right? And then in the component, all we have is the song lengths, right? So while the data is loading, I show a loading spinner or whatever, and then once I get the data, I create my song lengths component. And then over here in the song lengths component, right? So now all of this is I'm just focusing on the data visualization parts of this now. So in my template, I have the SVG file sort of pegged out how I want it, with variables for the things I need for the width and height. And then the songs, I'm going to loop through and create that as I go through each one. So here's my scale for D3. If you haven't used this before, domain. So when you use a D3 scale, oops, I'm sorry. Y'all are quiet. You should have stopped me, told me to make that bigger. The scale linear, right? The domain is your input, right? So my data, I know I go from 0 to 160 in the number of seconds. And my range, the output, I want it to go from 0 to whatever the width of the screen is that I have. All right. So now I go through each one. I calculate the bar width. I decide, is this either the shortest or the longest song, whether or not I want to highlight it. And then I've got another component now that will pass in the song data, where I want it to start in the SVG row-wise, and the width of the bar, and whether or not it's highlighted. That's just a true or false value. And then this guy now looks like I have a group tag, so this is all super simple, right? There's no D3 or anything in this. This is just rendering concerns, right? And I put out the text for the title. It goes above the bar. It has the track and the title. The bar itself, which is a rectangle SVG object. And the time goes inside of the rectangle at aligned to the right. All right? And that's it. Nobody here looks impressed. So pretty cool, right? We're not, now we've sort of built a visualization up with native React stuff. And we've left the D3 stuff, all of the DOM stuff, and the parsing and the attributes out. And we're just dealing with components that are simple to follow, simple to read, and reusable now too, right? All right. Oh, and then yeah, so how that looks is just, oops, here it is. And then when we inspect it, you can see, right, I just got a group tag for each track and whether or not it's highlighted. And then inside the group tag, I've got the 3 elements there for each thing. Right? All right. Let's go back. All right, next visualization, a hex map. Has anybody seen these before? Hexagon maps? So the reason we use these in data visualization is because of this, right? Anytime you want to make a map, you have to pick a projection for that map. And the projection distorts the map in some way. And some are better than others, but they all distort it somehow. The standard default ones you see a lot are over here. With the Mercator projection, right, you've seen Alaska look just gigantic, right? This is a map from the Washington Post. This is the Albers projection. This is pretty common in, like, if you read a newspaper or see something from a news source, it would be using this, right? And that's pretty common. But starting about 2012. They started thinking that this isn't the best way to present the data, especially during election time, right? Because this is a good example of the one on the left. This is the House of Representatives race in 2018 that just happened, right? And the Democrats won, picked up a lot of seats, right? But if you look at the standard projection, it looks like it was just a landslide to Republicans, right? And that's not the case, right? So you would have to know that looking at this, what we're measuring are votes, not acreage. And so different companies have come up with different ways to do this. This one is by the Washington Post, and it kind of works. It looks a little bit funky, right? But you're always balancing against what your users are accustomed to seeing, right? Everybody recognizes that as the shape of the United States versus what your story is, what the data is saying, and what the point you're trying to get across. Okay. So for this one, I used tilegrams, which I'll show you that in a second, to generate the hex bins. And then I took that out and put it in Illustrator just to design and snap things around, right? And this is a workflow you could use for anything. Any visualization, you're working with a designer maybe, where their outputs are going to come from one of these illustration tools. You get the SVG and take it out. We'll run it through SVG-OMG, which is a cool web-based tool I'll show you in a second. And then I'm going to stick it into an Angular component. Who are the Angular developers in the room? Just 2? Okay. Well, here, this one's for you then, Brian. All right, so tilegrams. Let me show you this tool real quick. So if you're ever wanting to make a map, this is an awesome tool. Put out, I think, Pitch Interactive, but they're somehow either in cahoots with Google News Lab or something. Oops, sorry. I didn't stop the slideshow. I didn't do that last time, did I? Y'all are too nice. All right. So here's Tilegram's tool. And so this one, so they start off with theirs first. Right. Let me see if I reload the page, maybe it'll come up. All right. There we go. So here's the tilegrams. And so this is the Electoral College. So now each state is sort of arranged in where you would expect to find it on the map, but each hex in here is an electoral vote, right? So this is more representative if we were doing an election map of what's going on rather than showing an actual map that has, like North Dakota here has 3 electoral votes, but they take up a huge area on the map, right? There's some other ones here. Here's the 538. I always thought this one was pretty good. They kept pretty close to how the U.S. is laid out. And And the one we're going to use for my map is the NPR 1-to-1, right? So this is just a one hex bin to each state, and each state is sort of laid out where it is on the map. Okay. All right, so I said Illustrator, and I use Illustrator like some people use like the word Coke, right? So it's Illustrator as in a vector design tool. I actually used Affinity Designer for me. So what you download from Tilegrams is just a map of an SVG file with all of those hex bins on it, and they're not labeled anyway. So I had to go in and add the labels to each state myself. And the snap tool in Affinity Designer, I think, is a little bit better than the one in Illustrator. But don't take my word for it. I'm not a designer. That's just me sort of playing with it and not being very good at things. So, but once I got everything set up in there, I exported it as an SVG, and I get to SVG-OMG. Has anybody ever used this tool? Couple? Yeah, awesome. So it's a command line utility called SVGO. You can run that from npm in your scripts if you just want to batch compress a bunch of SVG files. But SVG-OMG is a cool tool where you can just drag and drop an SVG one at a time, and it'll reduce it. So for this one, the SVG that I got out of Affinity Designer was a little over 3K, and this compressed it down to 2.3K. And it's just sort of rewriting numbers, stripping out some of the unused content and other stuff. So you get a nice, clean SVG file at the end. Right. The data set I used was from code.org. They're a nonprofit. Has anybody done like the Hour of Code stuff they do every year? They do a big push to have an hour of code in all the elementary schools and high schools. And every year they put out a 2000 State of Computer Science report that just says, which states have standards, have a curriculum set up for high school and elementary and middle school students to learn computer science. And Angular and SVG, so I had to use TypeScript for this, but that's okay. It wasn't too bad. And then we're just building out an SVG component. So it's pretty similar to the last one as far as code goes. So let me flip over. I'm keeping an eye on the door. I'm hungry. I've been told Jimmy John's is on the way. Oh, okay. Perfect. Yeah, well, hold on. Oh, man. Yeah, she just told me. Yeah. All right. Let me finish this one, and we'll eat. All right. So that'll be about halfway through. So Angular, this is pretty similar to how we did the last one, right? I have some text up top, and then I have a component here that I built called this app hex map. And then in that, you can see over here, we get a TypeScript file. There's not a whole lot in the TypeScript file other than the list of states that have a K through 12 computer science curriculum already in place. And then I have an extra method down here that just says whether or not a given state is in this array. And then the component now, so see the nice clean SVG file I got from SVG-OMG. I'm using ViewBox here, so that way I can, my SVG has a width and a height, but then when I render it, I just put the width to 100%, and all the units inside of the SVG are in these units, in the ViewBox units, right? And then here is how I conditionally set a class in Angular, which just says highlight it if I return true from that has standards call, and then each one of these. And I did have to go through all these manually, put those in, but it wasn't too bad. And everything else is pretty nice and clean. And we've got a legend down here for it. And what that looks like is, oops, real crappy. There we go. So, and here are the number of states. So we have 22 states that have set up a computer science standards for their K through 12 students. And this gives you a better representation of the USA as a whole, right? You can glance at this and see about half of them are shaded in, instead of looking at how big the states are and playing games there. This conveys the meaning a lot better than a traditional map. All right, so we were kind of rushed there at the end. How's everybody? Think we did okay there with the Angular? Everybody got it? Got what's going on, right? We take the D3 cruft and toss it out, and we're using modular D3 now and building components that we can reuse and mess around with. So next up, I wanted to do a choropleth map. So we're going to use a choropleth map and one of my new favorite tools, Vue.js. Has anybody used Vue yet? Vue developers? So this is a super awesome new framework, pretty similar like React or Angular, right? You're building out components with it. I'll show you some code for that in just a bit. Choropleth map, just to explain it, you've seen them all of your life, I'm sure, but if you've never heard the term, it's a thematic map where the area is shaded in proportion to some measurement. So usually you'll see them like the data I have here is unemployment data, but you'll see it for any sorts of things where you want to show a map, and like you'll have light areas and dark areas where there's some sort of high activity, right? The workflow for this one is a lot more simple than the other ones. I just have some D3 example code, and I wanted to do this one because I don't think I'm really like teaching you all how to do data visualization, but hopefully you'll be a little inspired and go back to your workplace and try to do this on your own. And when you do that, you'll search Google for some D3 examples or a choropleth example, and what you'll find is just a huge big file of D3 code, right? And so the skill I would really love for everybody to walk away with is how do you take that huge mess of D3 spaghetti code and convert it into a component that you can integrate in with your application that you're building. All right, so this is a choropleth I did a few years ago for a talk. So I guess actually this isn't a wholly original talk. Somebody asked me that earlier. So I did reuse this map. I updated the employment data. I have 2017 numbers now. But as you'll see, the D3 code is complicated and hard to follow. So before we get into the Vue code, I'll show you like where we're coming from and how I converted it, right? Vue.js, my favorite thing about Vue.js is computed properties. Anybody agree, disagree? No applause? All right, that's all right. Computed properties are awesome. So normally in React, right, you have state, and then if you change your variable, if you're like me, you might have some dependent variables that you've also got to go and update now. And everybody has different strategies for how to deal with that and how to fire it off. But with Vue.js, it's just baked in, and I'll show you how to do that here in a little bit. And what we're getting to is we're going to throw out a ton of D3 code and not use hardly any of it, but what we do need is a path generator. And I'll talk about that a little bit more when we get there, but that's what's going to take our GeoJSON, our shape files for states, and convert that into an SVG path element that we can put in our component. All right. And then here's just what I'm using from D3. We're going to use the DSV package. That's remember I said it's delimiter separated values. So the data you get from the Bureau of Labor Statistics is tab delimited. So we'll get the same output, but using a different function. The geo library, which we're going to use to compute the shape of Ohio and stuff, and take it from latitude and longitudes into SVG drawing commands. And then D3 scale chromatic, which does our color scales. I'll show you that here in a second. All right, so with that, in this. And so the thing is, when I wrote this, I remember it was 2015, I had a mullet, I was listening to hair metal, and I was so proud of this. Just kidding, it wasn't that long ago. But 2015 was a while ago, right? And I was so proud of this, right? I had a class that had everything in it, but now looking back at it, it's I would hate to have to maintain this code, right? So you go in here, even if you know D3, it's hard to follow, right? But basically, everything you build with D3 has to follow the same steps. So I have to get a root element, and I create the map. And here's a whole bunch of DOM manipulation, right? I'm creating an SVG element. I set the width and the height on it. I have to get a projection. And this is what I was saying by path generator. So what this does is, so everybody know SVG, you have a path element, and that path element has drawing commands, and that's it, like line to X and Y, line to X and Y. And what D3 geo provides for us, this geopath function, is it'll take a set of latitude and longitudes and a projection, and then use that to convert it to drawing commands that SVG can render. All right, and so I've got some groups. So I'm going to have a state map, and I'm going to render all the counties. So here's like the overall algorithm, right? I load the data, then I'm going to draw the shape of Ohio and set a color scale for the choropleth, and then I'm going to go through and render each county a different color based on the value in the data. All right. So we can just look through here real quick. Here's our data scales, our extent. Don't memorize any of this because it's all old now. But right, so all the hoops we had to jump through, right, to sort of manage the DOM and manage the visualization, right, and build up a big SVG element in there. Some of the legend stuff, scale range, yeah. And then here's how we draw the state, right? So we get the center of the map and rotate it and scale it. All this is just sort of boilerplate D3 stuff. But this is good because this is what we want to use D3 for, right? We want to use D3 for the visualization part. So this is sort of the meat on that we need to convert over. And then here's some more like just jQuery garbage, right? Like DOM manipulation and setting attributes and stuff. All right. So how did I do it? Well, I have a view component here. So here we have some explanation text up top. View components. I forget, how many view people did we have? Not many? None? Oh no. Okay, so if I'm introducing you to something new, I got to do a better job. So Vue is awesome. I encourage you all to try it out. So one of the cool things about it, I think, is that now everything's in one file, which you think, Michael, that's stupid, that's terrible. But I think it's awesome because it encourages you to have smaller components and separate things out and keep all your separation of concerns tidy and stored away. All right, so in every Vue file we have a template, and there are, like if you had a big one, you can separate these things out into separate files. You don't have to have them all in one Vue file, but it's the convention, and I like going with it because I think it leads to sort of smaller and tidier apps. So this is our main shell of the app. So this is like app.js and a React app. This is our main entry point. Oops, I'm sorry, that text is small again. It's going to make me do this for every file I show you, sorry. So we've got our template here, right? So we've got some markup, and then I have this choropleth map. Well, this vbind stuff here is binding to state variables. And then here is my JavaScript behind this Vue file. So I've imported my choropleth component, and I have a data API one. So this is another thing of like why I like Vue, right? Because if I had to put the fetch code for all of this method here would get super long, and then I'd have a hard time testing it, and it would lead to a whole bunch of other problems. So it sort of encourages you to get your cruft out of the component code and just keep this nice and tidy. All right. So my app has a state, a counties, and a data. The state is going to hold the shape of Ohio, my outer shape. Counties is the shape for all of the 88 counties in Ohio. And then data is going to be the unemployment data that I want to render onto the map. All right? And then all I do down here, this is a life cycle hook. Just like with React, you have like component did mount. This has created. So when this component gets created, this function fires off, and I call my API to get the county data. And then Vue handles, like in React, you have to call set state. But with Vue, you just use your regular class variable. So I just say this.counties equals counties, state, state, and data, data. And that's super simple and easy to follow. So hopefully that's self-explanatory there, right? And then we have our styles down here for the app. Let's go. So we just have one component, but notice in my component now I'm passing in the state, the counties, and the data. So now my choropleth map, zoom in here, I've got my template is just an SVG file, right? So no wrapper or crazy stuff there. There's my SVG file. I have my viewbox. So this is cool. I'm binding a viewbox element, use the colon here, to a attribute named viewbox. And this is actually a computed attribute, so I'll show you that in a second. But then the same thing here, I've got a group tag. So in SVG, you think of group tags as layers. So if you were in Photoshop or Illustrator, right, you have layers that you work on. In SVG elements, that's the same as a group tag, right? You just group a whole bunch of things together, and you can manipulate them all as one. So I have a class for my counties. I render that, and it's sort of reverse sort order, right? So the ones named first end up on the bottom of your SVG element. So I render the counties first, then I put a state outline above it, and that's it, right? So now, and hopefully what you see, like between this and this, right, is now everything separated out into where it should live, right? So now I have all of my rendering concerns up here, and how I've laid out my document is up here in the template. And here in a little bit, we'll get to the visualization parts. All right, so here's what I need from D3. So like I said before, I don't have to download this huge D3 library with everything filled in it already. I can just pull out the parts I need. I'm going to need to know the min and max from D3 array. Here are my geo stuff I need for calculating some different things. Scale linear, so that's, you go from input to an output in a different scale. And here's my color scheme. So those are just my imports. Now I've got to use them. And then here's my component data. So you can think of this as like state, right? This is where all of my state lives. So remember I had a view box up top. Does everybody know what viewbox is in SVG? Have you used that before? Go through it. So viewbox is what, when you set the viewbox, those are your width and height for your coordinates in the SVG file, right? And they may not have anything to do with how you render the data. So in this example, I have a map that I'm going to scale to be 100% of the screen, right? But if I did that, I would have to recalculate the pixels every time. So viewbox lets me set a aspect ratio and a coordinate system outside of how things are rendered on the screen. So I have viewbox here. So even though I have width and height here in my data, I can have a computed property now named viewbox. And Vue keeps track of when these things are accessed. And so anytime these change, the viewbox computed property changes as well. So in my template, I use it just like I would any other data variable. But this is sort of a computed value now where I need this weird string. Viewbox starts, it takes the lower left and the upper right hand corner, right? So I've got 0, 0, 2, width and height is my viewbox. Props, so these are declaring here what I expect to be passed into me, and then I use these in Vue just like I would a regular data attribute too. I can say this.state, this.counties, this.data. All right, so now let's get to, I'm going to skip ahead to this path generator. So when we're going to draw a state or a county, right? We need to go from latitude, longitude into those ViewBox SVG coordinate space. So just think of that as like, I'll take Dayton and I've got to render it to the middle of my screen, right? So what's the X and Y for that? I pick a projection here, a path generator, a centroid, and all of this is just D3 sort of mumbo jumbo. It looks crazy, and it is crazy, but you could look this up online in 2 seconds and just jam it into your code. I've been using these same 3 lines forever. I think at one, I don't know. All this is doing is sort of centering in on Ohio and using a specific projection, right? And now, since this is a computed property, anytime the state changes, so hopefully you could imagine if I was letting the user sort of flip through all of the states, maybe from a drop down, and then I would pass that in here, the path generator would recalculate anytime the state changes, the state variable, right? So I've got my path generator. Let's see, Ohio data. So this is another good example of use case for a filter. So the Bureau of Labor Statistics gave me a file for all of the counties in the United States, but in this case I only care about Ohio. So instead of using that, having to have that filter code in with my regular rendering code and everything else, I can have a computed property now that just filters that whole thing out for the Ohio counties. And what happens then is, I can use this and just have a sort of a filtered view into that big data list. And then this is another cool thing, right? So TypeScript versus JavaScript. Since I'm in JavaScript now and I need someplace to store this extent, I can just pop it there on the end of my results and nobody will ever care, and I can use it later, and it's awesome. So dynamic languages for the win. I don't know. Okay, now let's get to the methods here. So here are my methods. So compute path. So this takes in a GeoJSON feature and uses my path generator on it. So I can call this over and over again. I'll call this with the state and then again with every one of the counties. And then the fill color I'll call on each one of the counties. And all that does is look up in my county data for Ohio data, and then it calls my color scheme on it. And when it's all rendered out, it looks like crap. Here, there we go. So we get that. So I have remember this is the app component, and then inside of here is my map component. Here's my SVG with the view box, and I've got my counties group, state, and each one of the counties, right? So the color scheme here, it's a continuous scale. Talk about that for a second. So this interpolate yellow, orange, red. So let me show you a bit about that. So we go out here to this package in D3. You can see here it takes in a value between 0 and 1. So you still got to scale your data before you send it into the color scale, right? So we scale it between 0 and 1, and then I have all sorts of ranges here. So if anybody's used Color Brewer before, so there's this has been a long time ago now. There's been some research done on which are the best color palettes to use that are sort of good for people with different kinds of color blindness, and which ones are best for users to be able to pick out different shades. So we have all those built into the scale chromatic package here. I also have just continuous scales down here, which are, just what they say, a continuous scale between two colors. We have a whole bunch of different ones here. So you've seen stuff like this, right? Like Terminator heat map type stuff. And then, just shades. I think which one was I using? The yellow, orange, red. So that was this one, right? Nope, that's orange to red. There's one down here. Yellow, orange to red right there. So this is the one I use. So it colored the unemployment rates in Ohio between the minimum and the max. So I think like down here is 3.5% was the minimum, and the max was, I don't know, like 7 or 8% unemployment. So it colored all those ranges between here. All right. One more to get through, and then you guys can eat your potato chips again. All right. So I passed personally a major milestone this year. In January, I turned 40 years old. So I've been thinking, no applause or anything. That's all right. I know it's okay. It's more sad than happy, really. But so that's gotten me thinking about retirement. So just 25 more years, and and I'll be done with JavaScript for good. So I've been thinking about where I want to move, and I thought what would be good is making some sort of comparison, okay? So I'm going to compare a bunch of climate data for different cities and find the optimum place for Michael Bowman to retire to. But before I go on, I want to tell you, so if you're going to do this, right, so this is always the first thing, like people get super excited about data visualization and they want to use some of this stuff. If you post something like this to Twitter, like people will call you all sorts of hateful names and it'll be really sad, all right? So just know that going in, right? There's and I think we have this problem in the web design world too, right? You know, the chart that says, you know, which one of these two websites are you developing, right? And everything's just sort of gets homogeneous and stuff, and there's not a lot of imagination or inspiration in designs anymore, and it's kind of sad. And the same thing happens in data visualization. There was a literacy research paper that came out that you would be surprised at how abysmal our data visualization literacy is in this country. If you go into a Walmart and ask somebody what a choropleth map is, they will look at you funny, which kind of like you're all looking at me now. But it's so you get the same sort of pushback you do if you designed an awesome website with horizontal scrolling, right? People will treat you like you committed a crime against humanity or something, right? So the same thing with radials, like people don't like them. They're hard. The thing is, they're hard to compare, right? So Edward Tufte, he's a big guy in the data visualization community. He's famous for saying that the only thing worse than one pie chart is multiple pie charts. And it's true, because for your average human, radial things are hard to compare, right? Because you've got things going in different directions and things are at different levels, and it's tough. But if you follow that to its conclusion, you get to, we should always just use a bar chart and gray values, right? And that's no fun either. So you got to balance your, uniqueness and your fun stuff versus sort of patterns and what your users are used to. And it's getting better, right? Everybody's got the Apple Watch now with the activity rings. So, I don't know. I think people can read radial dials just fine. Depends on your audience, right? Also, this is a cookie cutter chart. So I'm going to do it here because I want to do an exercise where we're all going to break down the radar chart into components with me. But if you want to do a radar chart, here's some excellent libraries that you can use and just plop it right into your app and you'll be done in an hour. I've used most of these, so they're all good. Chart.js is super lightweight, quick, and good at what it does. So React Viz is another one that's really easy to use if you're in React already. All right, so here's our data. I've got an array. I know that's hard to see, but I've got an array of different U.S. cities, and we've got the city name, the average temperature, the average yearly temperature, the average precipitation in inches, and then I have for every month the average low temperature, the average high temperature, and the precipitation in that month. And the workflow for this one's pretty simple, right? I'm just going to develop it and tweak and iterate until I get it right. Okay? So here's what we're building. All right, we've got a radar chart here. I don't know if you can see it, but so what I did was this around 70 degrees right here. That's my optimum temperature. That's when I would venture outdoors. And so I did a plus 5 degrees and a minus 5 degrees. I called that the Bowman belt, right? Like the Goldilocks belt for planets, right? But the Bowman belt is where Michael would leave his house voluntarily. So we highlight that, and then I want to see, I'm going to plot every city for the orange is the high temperatures for every month, right? I've got the months going along in days, or in spirals here at different angles, and then the low is in blue, and then the stars coming out of the center is the precipitation for that month. All right, so how would you all break this up? Now you have to talk. Somebody has to answer me. I'm not going on. Just kidding. You could probably out-awkward me. Any ideas? So think of this like, so you do this all the time, right? If I was building a React app, right, and I wanted to re-implement CNN.com or something crazy, right? How would you break that up, right? It's all HTML. You'd start off saying, well, here's the nav bar. That might be a component. Here's like my main news story. That should be a component. Here's a list of secondary stories, right?
As layers, like you get the foundation of the grid.
Yeah, you got it, right? So we would do a component maybe for the axis. That's a good idea. That's actually what I did, right? Have a component for the axis, maybe another component for the temperature circles coming out, a component maybe for the labels, a different component for the temperature. Does that make sense? You all would have got there, I'm sure. All right, so when I was building this, I took some screenshots and made a GIF of myself developing it here. So there's me putting in the Bowman belt. There's my temperature band for the low and highs. At first, I was going to have it filled in, and then I didn't really like the design there, so I kind of started over, reworked things, tweaked the colors, and added it in. All right? That sound all right? I don't know. That's just how I did things. But that's not like this is there's no right or wrong way to do it, right? This is just how I did it. If I had been working with a designer or somebody better than me, they might have come up with this a little sooner, or even something better. I don't know. This is all just out of my head. All right, so one more code walkthrough and then we'll be done. So let me show you how I built it. This one has the most code of all of them, but I wanted to show something. I think all the other ones are pretty trivial, honestly. So this one's a little bit more in-depth, and I've got multiple components this time. So here is a React app. I'm back in React this time. Here's my app.js. I actually made a component for the nav bar and then the city card. So each city has its own card up here. And then in the card, I have the radar chart and then some of the yearly data right below it. The radar chart. Okay, so here are the components I ended up with. I should have made you all write down your own components and then we could compare. But here's what I ended up with. If I look at my index file now for the radar chart, I have one group tag that has the chart, and then I have another group tag for the labels. So the labels are labeled at the top where January was, and then at the bottom where July was. And then inside of there, I have, we just build these up from layers. So at the very bottom is the Bowman belt. That's my green circle. So let's go into that and see what that looks like. All right, so here, what I need from D3, I needed the scale linear. So remember, the scale just takes in an input range. So this was 0 to 100, so I only charted out to 100 degrees Fahrenheit. And then the output is between 0 and half the width of the chart, which is the radius of the circle, right? And then here I have my ideal temp set at 70, the deviation of 5 degrees. And then what I'm doing here is just figuring out where in that circle, how far out do I draw that ring. And then cool thing now, since we're not in D3 land and trying to do all of these ourselves, I can just look at my group tag here and have some cool stuff in it. So one thing is, it's actually very hard to draw a donut shape in SVG unless there's a donut tag I don't know about. So what I had to do was I made a circle out here and then put a mask on it, and then the mask is just a circle of the minimum, right? So that's how I get the band all around it. When you're dealing with masks, white is, if you deal in black and white, so if it's black, it gets cut out of the mask so you can see through it, and if it's white, it shows through. So that's what we had here, a circle with only part of it showing through, and that's the green band around there. Next, I put on the monthly axis. So this is what Alan was saying, right? The monthly axis, I didn't even need any D3 for that. I'm just taking a line element, and I've got 12 of them, and I just rotate them around the circle for each month, right? And it probably looks more confusing and intimidating than it is, but it's not that bad. One thing, so this calculate point, right? So what I have to keep doing repeatedly is calculating the point of the end thing, right? So I have a circle, and I need to go, what's the point to go from the center of the circle out to the edge of whatever circle I'm drawing? And so I ended up pulling this out to a utility function, right? Because we're all just in JavaScript land here, and where all miscellaneous things end up in a utils class. I have, this is just some math I looked up online. I should have said I knew this off the top of my head. Y'all would have been totally impressed. This is just stuff I Googled, right? And this has how you calculate that data, right? From your radius, how far out the point X and the point Y is, and you have to, do a sign of how many radians there are versus the number of months. And once I get that, I can return a point. All right, so once we get the monthly axis, I drew the precipitation bars. So remember, those are the blue bars that just jet out from the center. So it's basically the same code as the monthly axis, just instead of going all the way out to 100, I'm going out to wherever the precipitation guide tells me, right? So I used the D3 scale linear to do that, calculate my point, push on the bars, and then I've got a group tag here, right? So now everything's nice and small and testable. I could go in here. If I ever had a problem with the precipitation bars, I gave this to a coworker, they'd be able to just bop right in here and know where to fix things, which is good if you're getting handed off some of my code. All right, we've got the temperature markers. So those were the rings that went around. So they were kind of like the axis, but the gray circles that went out. So I drew markers at 32, so I knew where freezing was. Again at 60, 70, and 80, and 90. And then each one, so I just drew a circle at each one. And the thing there was just being able to scale it, from 0 to 100 and figuring out where to put that, put the radius for the circle, right? So all the circles are centered in the center, but they're different sizes depending on which one I'm drawing. So that's where that scale comes in. Yeah, I should. V2, right? This is the beta talk. So labels, and then I just labeled things out there just going out. So 32, 60, 70, and 80. And I've got a group tag there for the circles and the labels. And I know I'm going through this kind of quick. If you have a question, ask, but I have a feeling like if I were in your seat, I would probably want to take this home and probably forget about it. Or if I ever wanted to do one of these, I would pull it up later. So all this code is on GitHub. You'll have a link to get to this, and you can go in and spend some more time on it and chew on it for a little bit. The last one is the temperature band, where I printed out this one was a little bit more difficult. Has anybody ever watched any talks by Sarah Sweden? Or Sweden, I don't know if I'm pronouncing her last name. So she is, her talks on SVG are really awesome. I highly recommend them. But this was a trick I got from her, were these filter things in SVG now. So I made a filter that kind of makes those lines glow for the higher bands and the lower bands. And so once I have this glow filter, I just put it there on the high band and the low band as they go around, right? So nothing to it. All right. And then, so I think that's it, right? I've got labels out here, so that's just super easy, right? That's just January and July. I just position them at the top and the bottom and the center. One trick, so if you're trying to center in SVG text, you will need, happens a lot, is getting that text to line up. So this is always one that people don't know about. There's a text anchor attribute in CSS and dominant baseline. So what these two do is text anchor will put the anchor point for your text in the center of the text, which is what we wanted for this one. And then dominant baseline puts it in the middle of the text too. So if you ever need to center text in SVG, this is how you do it. Any of these you can also use as attributes on your SVG object too here. And I just crammed everything in one SAS file because I'm a horrible person. All right, so let's see what this looks like. Here is our charts. And we've got Dayton there. It's looking pretty bad, pretty far outside the Bowman belt. Santa Barbara's nice because the highs in Santa Barbara are right in the Bowman belt, so it might be a little cool, but at night, that's okay. Not too bad. Not a lot of rainfall there either. Like, geez, look at Dayton. It always rains here. Like, that's one thing. So, like, it rains more in Dayton than it does in Seattle, and they got the reputation for it. But Seattle, yeah, it's okay during the summer, but probably not much better than Dayton in the winter. Honolulu is pretty perfect. Maybe a little on the hot side. But, you're never going to find the perfect place, right? Yeah, and I just put in any place I had thought about living. I was thinking, I read this article once about Las Vegas being a great place to live because you can get cheap flights there. So if you lived in Las Vegas, you could just fly and visit family wherever you wanted. So it's kind of like a good central hub. I don't know if that's true or not.
You tailored the Bowman belt to Honolulu. And you look back from there.
Yeah, exactly. Yep, it's justification for where I want to go.
So. It was a snow day, and the other part of this decision is not here.
Yeah, I lucked out there. She'll see the video. All right, so that's it. I'll go back to my slides. It feels like here. That's it. Any questions or anything else before you all go back to work, go back to your snow days? Here's where the code's going to be. So this has all the code. It has the slides as well. The slides have speaker notes on them, so anything except for the dad jokes, you're going to have to come to me if you want more dad jokes. But other than that, everything's in the speaker notes on PowerPoint. So go for it. Yeah?
Yeah, so I'm wondering what the greater data visualization community is doing, because what I see kind of as a pattern is that you've got a lot of things several years ago was using exclusively D3, mm-hmm. and you showed some of that code and said, yeah, this is kind of a mess. And then you've got all these examples where you're using these component frameworks like React and Vue. Do you feel like the greater data visualization community is doing the same thing, where they're saying, oh, we're going to use inline SVGs components and maybe pull in D3 if we have to for some of the scaling, but otherwise we're trying to do it this way.
Yeah, so it's kind of all over the map right now. So if you use a library like ReactViz that Uber put out, yeah, they do things this way. They do things the right way. But if you just look up, so it's real bad because if you just Google how to data viz in React, right, you'll see a bunch of people that like look for component did mount, and then they're just doing DOM manipulation themselves all in that big function, and that's terrible. Like, you don't want to, you're just defeating the purpose of React at that point. So yeah, I think long term this is how things will go, and maybe we'll get some. There are already some libraries out there that do this, but especially if you want to do just your custom visualization, this is how you should do it. Good question. Anybody else? Thank you all for coming. Thanks for braving the weather and not crunching your chips too loudly. You guys can eat your potato chips now. Go for it. Eat all you want. So, yep, thank you.